Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you globally. I'm Hadebusui Holutayo Holomadewa, and this is another wonderful edition of Jesus Christ Story. However, this edition is so important and so powerful to me because we have a dynamic personality today and a leader, a father, and a visionary personality for humanity in globally. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a wonderful person that we personally regard as a mentor that every young and old, male and female, must learn from. Ladies and gentlemen, I have Reverend Liberato Baustita on the call today. Good morning, sir, Mr. Reverend.
Good morning, Tayo. It's a
doing?
pleasure to have you.
Okay, thank you so much. We are doing this presently at the Church Center in the United Nations Plaza in New York, and giving Reverend the floor to introduce yourself to our global audience.
Well, thank you for having me here. I am the Reverend Dr. Liberato Baustita. I am a United Methodist clergy, and I represent the United Methodist Church at the United Nations worldwide. It's work. It's a ministry that I have been doing for almost 3 decades, 29 years to be exact, and it's a presence of a faith-based organization, the church, in a non-faith-based setting, the United Nations.
Oh, that is wonderful. Presence of a faith-based organization in non-faith-based settings. That is wonderful.
I don't say that very lightly. The non-faith setting description of the United Nations is to simply differentiate the role of religion from that of nation states.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, the work of the United Nations is very much a value-based and work and representations like I do on behalf of a faith-based organization, that is the United Methodist Church, asserts that the United Nations is fundamentally a venue for ethical and multilateral action, and therefore the presence of faith-based actors in the multilateral system is a presence to make sure that statecraft, that which nation states do by way of the United Nations or by way of the multilateral system, is in keeping with our understanding of what human rights and human dignity should be, of what peace and security should be, what the protection of the integrity of God's creation should be.
Beautiful.
The planet are not sidelined, are not marginalized perspectives, but are part of the core of the multilateral discussion.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You see the way you broke it down. So, Reverend, you've been in minister for over 29 years, if I'm right?
Here.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you so much. Do you mount pulpit as well to teach the Bible on Sundays or during the week, or your role is just representations that you have?
My role is representation. I don't have a local church, so it's in the United Methodist polity. It's called appointment beyond the local church. In other words, I do not have a local church where I preach every Sunday, but I have this office to preach every day at the UN. The physical space sometimes speaks louder than words.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, someone said, and I can remember, when you preach, if you need words, you do them sparingly. In other words, the building itself is a sermon in front of the UN.
Beautiful.
The Church Center for the United Nations was built by my organization, the General Board of Church and Society, in 1963.
Wow.
It is a testament to the role of faith-based bodies, and the chapel, as you've seen, is a multi-faith chapel, and it is a witness to the understanding that the true north, the moral and ethical orientation of the United Nations, is not antithetical but rather akin to to religious understandings. From a Christian perspective, in fact, I say that Christ is not the alternative. If Christ is our peace, then Christ should not be an alternative, but rather the imperative. Now, do I say that in straight terms, in biblical terms, when I'm speaking to a diplomat? I don't. Because I respect the multilateral system as a non-religious setting. But I do not withhold my tongue and my words in saying that the multilateral system has been built by moral and ethical foundations that are not alien but rather central to the core of Christian understanding.
Beautiful. Thank you. So take us to the history of the United Nations, the role of maybe the biblical truth or the role of the Christian understanding in the history of United Nations.
Well, let me take it a different route.
Okay.
I call it, and it's not original to me, Asa Karam, formerly the head of Religions for Peace, calls the work of faith-based organizations at the UN as multi-faith multilateralism. That multilateralism is a multi-faith work. In other words, that the Christian ideal is not the only understanding of the moral and ethical orientation of the UN. In other words, that there are claim that the claim of other religions to the very pillars of the UN are equally legitimate as our claims.
Okay.
That does not withhold me from using specific Christian terminology. My latest column says love as a statecraft. In other words, echoing what the African American philosopher and professor at Harvard, Cornel West, said, justice is what love looks like in the public square. Now, that's a secular formulation, but that is a patently religious statement. Justice is what love looks like in the public square. In other words, when you go to the public square and decry, protest the violation of rights, when you protest the diminution of global cooperation around the United Nations, you are saying that you love people on the planet, you like peace and prosperity so much that anyone who deviates from global cooperation to address those issues is itself a deviation from the Christian understanding of love.
Wow.
That love of God is equally love of neighbor, and therefore love is co-constitutive of the divine and the human.
Wow. Thank you, Reverend, for doing that. In the years of your work at the multilaterals, have you seen some of the challenges? Have you encountered some of the challenges? And how are you able to use your faith to subvert those challenges?
Well, in my 29 years work here, I think the most important change in the discourse is that as forces in society try to erode the importance of multilateral cooperation, what the counter to that is the increase in the assertion of global values, reminding the nation states of the values of cooperation, of collaboration, of being friendly to one another, and friendly relations, harmonious relations. That's what the Charter of the UN uses. That harmonious relations among nations must be the fundamental ethic of international relations. That's a secular formulation. But that has not been used in the earlier years of the United Nations, because the United Nations and the international system is the baby of what is called the Westphalian legacy. The Westphalian legacy is part of the era of the Reformation. Part of Martin Luther's legacy is to say that the nation state is separate from church. So in the Western tradition, the separation of church and state, the separation of religion and state is very clear. So there's something unique about the United Nations because it is a club of nations, but its role exhibits the aspiration of nations that people's human rights may flourish, that the planet may be sustainable, that we must protect the planet because it is God's great magnificent creation, and so are human beings. When we use explicit religious language, there is wider receptivity now than when I started my work. So one must not be bashful to identify a specific religious understanding. I think the challenge, though, is to be able to navigate between explicit religious language and language that nation states can resonate with. So it's part art and science to be able to say love is a statecraft. That loving your neighbor is equivalent to multilateralism.
Wow. Even still looking at that, Church Center still retain the name.
Say that again?
Church Center,
Yes.
still retain the name. Everybody can see it. All the flyers still shows Church Center.
That's why the building itself is a sermon every day. That faith-based communities are watching the UN, and that reneging on their duties to maintain peace and no longer visit the world with wars is a constant calling. And that's a secular language. Beautiful. But it is a religious assertion.
Sure.
Christ is our peace. And therefore the vocation of religion, so that the very least of Christianity, is for that peace to inhabit the world, not war.
Wow. Peace to inhabit the world, not war. I can see something there. The church and society, the United Methodist Church, living faith, seeking justice, pursuing peace. Those are the fundamental things you just expanded. Thank you so much, Reverend Liberato Baustita. I've been speaking with President Baustita for a few minutes now. So we move to the next phrase, Reverend. You're president for some decades now of the Congo. Tell us the role of NGO in the multilaterals, and also tell us the role of why more NGOs must get themselves to be a part of the Congo as things are changing. Thank you.
Congo is for almost 8 decades now, Congo has been a direct interface between the non-governmental community and the United Nations system. And I'm explicit use United Nations system because while Congo is accredited with the highest consultative status, which is the general consultative status at the UN through ECOSOC, the ecosystem of its work includes the entirety of the UN system, and that meaning our members address not just the United Nations Security Council, ECOSOC, and the other functional commissions of the United Nations, but we have members that address World Health Organization, International Telecommunications Union, World Bank, IMF, in other words. So the whole gamut of the UN and the multilateral system are venues in which our members do their advocacy on. Now, Congo is one of less than 150 NGOs with general consultative status. In other words, over the years, it has demonstrated its ability to address the multitude of UN agenda. For those of you who know me under my presidency, and it's been an honor and privilege to have served the longest of any Congo president, the first ever to serve 3 terms as president. So the role of Congo has been to presence the civil society agenda at the UN. And for those who know me, I have used a formulation which says that Congo enables NGOs to access the premises of the UN and the promises of the UN. So access to the premises and the promises. Now let me explain that, which is critical to the fundamental role of Congo. Congo, the first formulation, access to the premises, means that Congo must fight for tayo to be able to have access to the spaces, to the meeting rooms, to the conferences of the UN, making sure that they get accreditation, they get the UN pass as the premises, the physical premises. But I argue, what good is access to the premises when you do not have access to the promises, meaning the substantive agenda of the UN. They may allow you to go through the UN door to the UN building, but then the conference room is closed for you to make an intervention. So the access to the premises must be coupled with access to the premises. And for almost 80 years, Congo has been framing has been formulating how NGOs should approach the issue of human rights, approach the whole issue of climate justice, of migration justice, and so many other issues around the world. And it does this by way of not just Congo, but its substantive committees, the NGO committees that are spread in the 3 major regions, 3 major headquarters and offices of the UN in New York, headquarters, UN in Geneva, and UN in Vienna.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. The role of church, present-day church in the UN, what's their role?
Well, there is no, one way of addressing is that there is no unique role of church and religious bodies apart from the NGO role. In other words, even bishops will have to have this same pass. There used to be a time when I invited the United Methodist bishop, and I had to bring the bishop to line up and get a pass. And I said, I'm a bishop, for goodness sake. Why should I be subject to humiliating line? Why can't I just, with my cassock? And we are religious bodies at the United Nations are not governments, and therefore we are all non-governmental organizations. So I want to make sure that we're clear that the United Methodist Church, the Baptist Church, the Lutheran Church, they are all NGOs in relation to the UN. As long as you're not government, you are non-government.
Sure.
Congo has what is called the NGO Committee on Freedom of Religion or Belief. Congo also has the NGO Committee on Spirituality, Values, and Global Concern. Now, these are not the only venues where the religious understanding of international affairs, the religious understanding of multilateralism is discussed. As I said, every committee, every work of an NGO has a moral and an ethical orientation. So the religious discourse is not a franchise, it's not owned, it's not monopolized by religious bodies. But if you are indeed a religious body, then you have an a priori mandate to speak the religious language.
Okay.
I mean, we do not expect the International Trade Union Confederation to speak religious language. But certainly when they say the protection of labor, I can reformulate that. Blessed are those who labor. That's a religious language. I can quote from the Bible for that matter, but you don't expect ITUC to be quoting the Bible. And yet they are saying that God's people in the world of work must be protected. That's the marriage of the religious and the secular language. And that beautifully happens in a UN setting.
Thank you. Personally, do you believe in Bible?
Why shouldn't I? I'm a clergy. Of course I do. But here's the critical formulation, Tayo. Belief is not in relation to the Bible. Belief is in relation to what the Bible speaks about. And it speaks about Christ, Jesus Christ, God and Jesus Christ. So I believe in Jesus Christ, and the Bible testifies to the person of the Bible, of Christ.
Thank you so much.
You don't believe in the Bible. You believe in what the Bible speaks about. And it is a story of the Christian faith in Jesus Christ.
So thank you. So basically you were telling me that as a believer in Jesus Christ, I have a role to play in the multilateral system as well, and I need to make my voice louder at the United Nations as well.
People and the planet are God's wonderful handiwork.
Oh.
Anytime there is an assault on the person, this gives me the opportunity to give you my religious understanding of human rights. Human dignity is God's gift of their image. It's called the Imago Dei, the image of God in every human being. So human dignity, every person born bears God's image, irrespective of how you look, how your skin color is, if you have other abilities aside from having 2 arms and 2 legs, etc. Every human being bears an innate dignity. Human rights are the protections we give to that dignity. In other words, because human dignity is God's gift to humankind, the human rights struggle has been to make sure that we reciprocate that divine gift of image by saying, God, on a daily basis, I will make sure I will protect that gift. So the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, are human action to reciprocate the graciousness of God for having lent them their image in us. So human rights are the protections we give to dignity. Dignity is the divine gift of their image in every human being.
Wow.
And the work at the United Nations is complementary to that protection. That's why you heard me yesterday speak of the infrastructure of welcome and hospitality and the architecture of protection. The architecture of protection is a multilateral duty that we owe to God. Now, that's from a Christian understanding. We owe it to God to reciprocate a gracious gift, the gift of their likeness in every person, the gift of dignity. So we say we will work on a daily basis to protect that divine gift by ensuring that we enact as many laws and protections that protect that gift.
Oh, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, all over the world, I've been speaking with Reverend Baustita from Cohen, rep of United Methodist Church, and he has been phenomenal in this session. You know, one of the beautiful things I've learned over the years is this. In my language, it says "shoki lobyoge," which means little. It's enough for us. This is just part one of this interview. We're going to continue again. We're going to have more, but I just want us to learn to see the role of the church, so that believers, pastors, will see that they have their roles in the multilateral system as well. Because if you look at some of the beautiful things we teach every Sunday, is towards what you said, planet and what? The people. Health care, education, if you look at it, poverty, prosperity. These are all the subject of the things that
The elimination of hunger,
God-
the eradication of poverty,
those are
the making sure that people are able to
feed.
to receive the bounty of God's creation, the bounty of the earth are for all people. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. In other words, any entity that denies the fullness to be shared by God's people is a violation of a divine mandate to share in that bounty.
Wow. Your last word, advice to pastors, not just in Nigeria, but all over the world.
To pastors
who lead congregations all over the world, who doesn't find value in systems like this.
I'll make it simple.
Again, I'm asking you to do that because as a reverend also.
Yes. I'll make it simple. Jesus is Lord of all or not at all. Jesus is Lord of the social world. Jesus is Lord of the economic world. Jesus is Lord of the political world. In other words, politics is not outside the religious purview. Our work at the United Nations is an assertion that Jesus and God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit encompasses the entirety of human existence. And politics, economics, and the social community are part of God's community. These are imperfect communities, but they are subject to the pardoning and transforming power of God. In other words, human institutions are not divine institutions, but they are institutions through which we make real and make known God's desire for a better world, for a prosperous world, for a planet that exudes of the magnificence of God's creation. And therefore, when we say that Christ is Lord of all, it means the entirety of the human community and the human and the social process.
Thank you, Reverend Liberato, for that submission. That's you actually speak my mind. What we are looking for, you actually touch that part, especially when you venture into politics. That we need to be effective more in politics. So, Reverend,
let me lest some of your audience and hearers misunderstand. When I use politics, politics is the ordering dynamic of society.
Ordering dynamic of the society.
I want to make use that as a definition because the immediate assignment of the definition is that politics is about politicians, and therefore pastors should not be politicians. That's an okay statement. But when we say that the assertion that Christ is Lord of all means that every human activity is subject to divine grace, that they are imperfect institutions in need of realignment, of rerouting to the justice, love, and mercy orientation. The charity that we must exercise with each other is that none of us has a franchise of finality, and therefore human creation, God's creation, with the tinkering of the human, is always a process in perfection. We are called to perfection, but nothing is perfected by humanity. Only Christ perfects it, and therefore it is with a sense of humility that we tinker with politics. It should be with a sense of humility that we tinker with economics. It should be with a sense of humility that we tinker with the human business, because the final arbiter is God's justice and God's mercy.
Thank you so much, Reverend. Thank you
You
so
haven't
much.
heard me formulate this in Congo, but you're talking to me as a United Methodist minister.
Yeah, definitely. This is not a Congo program. This is minister, and that's the essence of it. As a believer, in which are strong, there's United Nations system. We need to learn from your experience, and build from your experience as the for believers to see this as a place of advancing the glorious work, as well as also advancing the kingdom of God. Thank you, Reverend.
It's been an honor and a privilege.
Thank you so much. See you guys